Ladies and gentlemen, it's with a great deal of satisfaction today that I can announce that Cabinet has approved the purchase of 4 Boeing P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft from the United States government. The 4 P-8s will replace the 6 aging P-3 Orion Maritime Patrol aircraft we currently have and that have been operated by the Royal New Zealand Air Force since the 1960s.
The P3 was a critical element, and the P8 will be a critical element of New Zealand's presence in the Pacific.
An early Christmas present for our Air Force today, the arrival of the first of 4 new jets set to take over surveillance and transport duties in the Pacific region. The P8 Poseidon touching down in Ohakea as part of a $2 billion investment in our defence capability.
After 10 years of flying the P3, it's a lot smoother on the new aircraft. It's not as bad.
These new planes will be a lot more comfortable for crew. In the P3, they use earplugs to block out the noise and a bucket for the toilet.
After 56 years of service, our 6 Orion P3 Maritime Patrol aircraft have been retired. I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, our biggest defence purchase since the Anzac frigates 3 decades ago. What are the new $2.5 billion Poseidons like, and what exactly will they be doing? And also, why would you name an aeroplane after the Greek god of the sea?
Well, I think you'd have to go back to the US who named it, but as far as I know, Poseidon presides over the maritime domain, and I think he was the god that looked after seafarers and ships.
This is Wing Commander Mark Whiteside, who's in charge of the Poseidon Transition Unit at the Ohakea Air Base in Manawatu. The first of the 4 Poseidons is sitting in its purpose-built $250 million hangar there, a move from Whenuapai in Auckland.
And that was a deliberate choice when the P8s were acquired, and that's mostly around the runway length considerations. So Whenuapai in Auckland, where number 5 Squadron is currently located, is a slightly shorter runway than what we have here at Ohakea. So the P8 is a little bit bigger than the P3. It's a lot heavier, and that just means it needs a longer runway to be able to get airborne to conduct the same kind of task that we expect out of the P3s. So that's the prime reason behind shifting what is number 5 Squadron down into Ohakea. There's a few other considerations as well. Ohakea is a lot more rurally based. It's not surrounded by housing as we have up in Whenuapai, so there's plenty of room for us to load armaments onto the aircraft and keep our safety zones well intact.
You've had to build new hangars, haven't you, for the new aircraft?
That's right. Part of the project is to basically build some infrastructure.
This is a significant build. It will be 180 metres long, 80 metres wide and 26 metres high. This will house 2 hangars, mission support and operations centre. It'll have maintenance facilities, a sophisticated training wing including a full flight simulator, and it will be the new home for 5 Squadron when they move down to Auckland. And
also some of what we call the airside works, so increasing the strength of some of the taxiways just in the apron that the aircraft operates from, because it is a very heavy aircraft in comparison to some of the other fleets that we operate in the Air Force. So yes, there is quite a big infrastructure project that comes along with the move to Ohakea. I think it's a $250 million infrastructure project that's certainly put a lot of life into the region here from a construction perspective. Certainly employed a lot of local companies as well.
And will the personnel of number 5 relocate? Are they all moving down?
It's not quite that simple. So the unit operating the P8s right now, we're called the Poseidon Transition Unit. And once the P3s are retired, basically the name of number 5 Squadron will certainly come down, and we'll assume the name of number 5 Squadron. Now, to do that, we've taken some of the 5 Squadron people, quite a lot of them, obviously, and trained them on the P8, and they're now down here operating. But we've also drawn people from other parts of the Air Force to put them together here in Ohakea to become 5 Squadron Harkia operating the P8.
And have you sent them to the US to train?
Yes, we have. So we have ground support, both maintenance and mission support folk have been trained, and the aircrew as well have undertaken training. Some of them have done short courses, and a small number have actually been embedded for actually up to 2 or 3 years on exchange with both the United States and Australia, who also operates the P8s. That way we have a pool of people who are not only just immediately trained on the aircraft, but some of our personnel have been trained and actually have experience on the aircraft, so that right now that they've returned home to Harkia, we can hit the ground running as much as possible.
The Poseidons fly about 25% faster than the Orions, with a cruise speed of 440 knots. It's about 800 kilometres an hour. And they can be up in the air for 8 to 9 hours, which is actually not quite as long as the old planes. They can, however, be refuelled mid-air. And while New Zealand doesn't have any refuelling tankers, that feature could be utilised on joint international exercises because our allies also fly Poseidons. The new planes are more comfortable for the crew and less susceptible to turbulence.
The aircraft itself is able to conduct surveillance and reconnaissance of basically maritime areas, whether it be above the ocean, on the ocean, under the ocean, and also coastal islands. So from a New Zealand perspective, that means we have a maritime patrol aircraft that will be able to conduct surveillance, either whether it be New Zealand's territorial seas, or if we step out further to our exclusive economic zone, which is 200 miles from shore, or even further to the Southern Ocean and the Ross Dependency or the South Pacific environment. So we can conduct surveillance in any of those areas, and that surveillance can be for a whole host of reasons. It could be something like a search and rescue for vessels missing at sea. It can be what we call humanitarian aid or disaster relief. So post a significant weather event, we can conduct that surveillance, like we said, of coastal areas of interest to see where the damage may be and what the response in an emergency situation may be required. So, just to take it back, it is a direct replacement for the P3 Orions, which have been performing these roles very well for decades now, and that's the purpose of the P8 Poseidon. And
you said under the sea, under the ocean, has it got submarine spotting capability?
Yeah, so it has an acoustic sensor, just like the P3s did. So it can detect submarines and monitor the underwater environment full stop. So, whether that be, our submarine cables or underwater vessels like submarines, yes, that's what the acoustic system can do for us.
And you said they're direct replacement for the Orions, but there were 6 Orions and there are 4 Poseidons, correct? Is that a downgrade in capability?
No, it's not a downgrade, but you are correct. So we've gone from a fleet of 6 P3K2 Orions down to 4 P8 Poseidons. And I think the way to describe this is that we had 6 P3 Orions, but we didn't have any simulators. So the crews up in Auckland on number 5 Squadron operating the Orions would have to travel overseas to conduct simulator training, or they would have to take the aircraft up and conduct training in the aircraft itself. Now, with the P8, we're procuring 4 P8 Poseidons, but we're also getting full simulators, including a flight deck simulator for the pilots, but also a back-end, what we call a back-end mission simulator, so that the aircrew down the back of the aircraft operating all of the sensors can also do that in the simulated environment. And the combination of that simulator means that we do much less training airborne when we compare ourselves to the Orions. So the 4 P8s that we get are actually available for tasking in support of other government agencies. It's actually an increase on what you get with 6 P3s when you consider how much training we had to do to maintain that with the P3 Orions.
I thought you were going to tell me that 2 were always parked in the garage being fixed.
Well, that absolutely comes into any reasoning when you look at aircraft fleets. And naturally, the P8 itself won't have all 4 on the line every single day of the year. There is still maintenance that has to occur. But in comparison to the P3s, who are now 56 years old, the amount of time, both cost and resources, that goes into getting it available is just it's getting worse and worse every year. Hence the need for the replacement.
But the Poseidons have big wings to fill. Over the years, the Orions have been lifesavers across New Zealand's massive ocean area of responsibility.
New Zealand's search and rescue region literally goes from the South Pole to the equator, halfway to Australia and halfway to Chile.
Yesterday, an RNZAF Orion spotted 8 survivors drifting in a dinghy, and they were rescued by a fishing boat.
We sent the P3 up to help and assist Tonga in its assessment.
The search is kicking off pretty much at first light today. We've got, obviously, the Royal New Zealand Air Force's P3 Orion is still in the scene.
We're extremely grateful. The crew of the P3 that spotted David in Sydney, true heroes.
I think they've been astonishing in terms of the way that we've been able to extract every last drop of capability out of them. Some hugely talented people have flown in them over the years, whether it's submarine hunting or this, finding the life raft in a vast area of ocean. It's a hugely challenging and demanding practice, and one they've carried out with real aplomb.
This is David Cappy, the Director of the Centre for Strategic Studies at Victoria University.
I have no reason to think that that we won't get to the same sort of place with the P8s. Obviously, we've got NZDF crews that have been training on the P8s now for, I think, 2 years, and obviously what they're able to do and the different kinds of activities will be phased in over the next few years. But I've got a great deal of admiration for the people who make these things possible. So I don't think there'll be any difference.
Did we need to spend this money for brand new planes, or could we have gone with the Orions for a while longer?
I mean, I think the starting point for that in some ways is just look at a map. And when you see where New Zealand is and in this vast maritime domain that surrounds us, clearly we need some kind of ability to know what's going on out there, some kind of ability to patrol it. What we've been using was the Orions, which are, remarkable aircraft. But the oldest of those airframes dates back to the 1960s. And they've had multiple upgrades over the years with new wings and new bits of this and that have been added. And I think realistically, they just reached the end of their life, that there was very little you could really do to upgrade them from here. So the P8s, they're an expensive capability, but they're really a pretty remarkable investment. And looking forward, it's expensive, but there's a sort of an investment in decades into the future.
The government has never had to call on the Air Force to arm its planes ready for combat, but the Chief of Defence, Air Vice Marshal Kevin Short, says that doesn't mean they never shoot missiles.
We do weapon practice, both dropping bombs and torpedoes on a regular basis with the P3. They're just probably not seen by the public, but we do that to keep our military capability going.
They're incredibly expensive because they've got that war-making capability that we feel New Zealand really needs to kind of lead the way in moving away from, and which is something that really belongs to another century.
The Greens initially had reservations about this spending, even though they were part of the government that approved it, because of the ability to weaponise these planes. How important is that, or how worrying is that?
Well, I don't think it's worrying. I think that they're an advanced weapon. They are a weapon. They're an aircraft that's designed for a whole range of tasks, maritime patrol aircraft that's designed for a range of tasks. And those tasks range from, at one end of the spectrum, search and rescue and responding to humanitarian assistance and disasters in the Pacific and fisheries patrol. But they're also a high-end platform for anti-submarine warfare and for essentially for being able to detect what's on the surface and what's below the surface. So to pretend that these aircraft are only really about search and rescue or humanitarian assistance or environmental monitoring really misses the point. These are aircraft that have the ability to work with partners and work in a range of environments, including much more dangerous and non-permissible environments, and to be able to carry on and advance New Zealand's interests in regional and international security.
But New Zealanders do like to think of their defence forces like that, don't they? They're the heroes of the sky, and they just go around spotting drug runners and lost fishermen and giving people gear after cyclones. Do we need to get out of that way of thinking?
I think we do. I mean, I think one of the lessons that's come home in spades over the last couple of years is that we're living in a much more challenging and dangerous world. We've seen in the war in Ukraine, we've seen it in our region, much more willingness to resort to the use of coercion and force and a sort of a world of might makes right. We're seeing the fact that multilateral institutions, which New Zealand has been a strong supporter of and put a lot of emphasis on in its foreign and security policy traditionally, are really struggling to deal with the range of challenges that are presenting themselves at the moment. And that's not to, we shouldn't be panicky or hysterical about the challenges that are out there, but I think we do need to recognise that the world is a more challenging place, and New Zealand's national interests and security interests are being challenged, and we need to think about how we best want to respond. One of the criticisms was that this is really a gold-plated aircraft that's really about anti-submarine warfare, and it's really about buying into or tying yourself into your big allies' concerns about security, and not about an independent foreign policy. But I really think an independent foreign policy in many ways is about giving the New Zealand government choices, and the P8. It can do that huge range of tasks from the sort of softer end, from the search and rescue, from the transnational crime fisheries, and so on. But it can also provide New Zealand governments with options and choices in the event of a much more dangerous and challenging scenario in our region, one that we don't want to ever see. But as I said, we're living in a more dangerous region and a more dangerous world. So thinking about these issues and addressing them square on, I think, is sort of incumbent on all of us.
The government has not made this decision lightly. We took the business case back to first principles and questioned and analysed all of the options thoroughly ourselves. We did not rubber stamp the former government's homework. Maintaining maritime patrol capability is essential for New Zealand's national security and for our ability to contribute to global security efforts.
It's difficult to show your ordinary New Zealander just what the sort of instant returns are compared to more money on hip replacements or schools or housing. But when you think about them as decades-long investments, and also you think about how the way that New Zealand's interests in the world and our economy sit on this set of rules and practices that we've been really lucky with, I think, in some ways over the last 30 or 40 years, and that are increasingly, we're in a world where some of those things that those assumptions are being turned upside down. It's really important to make those investments and those decisions, but politically not necessarily very appealing.
It is the best deal. Let me just put it to you that way. And I wouldn't be assuming that it was the dearest option on an aircraft by aircraft basis. That's all I'll say to you.
I think anybody who's been following the news over the last few years will understand that the Pacific certainly has become a more crowded and more complex place. There's a whole range of actors that are increasingly present. Including the People's Republic of China, which is more influential, more present, and as we've learned over the last year or so, is also increasing to step up its security presence in the region. There's also a growing presence of other actors, including transnational crime syndicates looking to move drugs, for example, from Latin America to what are fairly lucrative markets in Australia and New Zealand through the Pacific. And then to the south of New Zealand, we've obviously had a problem with illegal unreported fishing for a number of years, with many different countries and different flagged vessels involved. And so you're right, our maritime domain is a much more complex and much more challenging place that it's been, and that's without looking out further to sort of the maritime periphery around maritime East Asia, where we're obviously seeing much more intense competition playing out between great powers.
So do we spend enough on defence?
I mean, I think the clear lesson is you can look and see that successive governments of left or right have decided that defence isn't a priority for their spending. I think there's debates about how much New Zealand actually does spend. There's a bit of a variation in some of the numbers that are floating around, partly depending on what you count. One of the high numbers that floats around is about 1.5% of GDP. The other end of the spectrum, I've seen public reports of less than 1%. I think the one thing we can say for sure is that compared to many of our closest partners and allies and comparable states around the world, we do spend less. And at the same time, if we look at how a huge range of states have responded to the war in Ukraine, to a much more challenging security environment over the last year or so, 18 months, that they've actually decided that they do need to spend more on their defence.
And now we have the P8s. We're part of a club.
This is an aircraft that's used by Norway, by Germany, by South Korea, as well as by the US, the UK, Australia, of course, and India. So it's a diverse club, but I mean, I think it's a club in the sense that it's become, hugely successful maritime patrol aircraft. It's a mature technology. It means it's got a real future ahead of it. And in terms of buying the P8s, what you're also doing is buying into not just a plane and a set of systems inside it, but you're also buying into a series of ongoing upgrades and improvements, what are sometimes called the spiral upgrade program, which come along every 2 or 3 years, which are available to the people who are part of that community of P8 users, if you like, or most of them, which enhance and upgrade its capabilities and mean that you don't end up with a situation where we ended up with the P3, where to really just come to the end of its natural life.
Club of one, as we were.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a fondness for the Orion?
Oh, we all do. We all do, and it's hard to explain, but you spend enough time in that aircraft, taking it into a lot of interesting situations and search and rescues, and it's kept us all safe for so many years and provided such great service to our country that it is kind of sad, very, very sad. It's a double-edged sword. It's sad on the one side, but then again, we're also quite happy that as a country we recognise the big need for a maritime patrol aircraft, and the future's been secured with the P8 Poseidon, and we know that the P8 will pick up exactly where the P3 has left things.
So you've been on board the Poseidon, had a good poke around?
Yes, yep. It's great. It's got that new car smell to it. I can assure you. And it's nice and shiny. It's pretty, it's not something we're used to from Number 5 Squadron, where we've been operating the Orions for a very long period of time. But no, it's great to have it here, and we're taking great care of it, and we've certainly had it up and flying already.
As for the Orions, one will go to the Wigram Air Force Museum in Christchurch. The other 5 will be scrapped or potentially sold, as long as the US State Department approves of who that military technology is going to. That's it for today. I'm Alexia Russell. The Detail is supported by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Today's episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Sarah Robson and Bonnie Harrison. Thanks to Wing Commander Mark Whiteside and Victoria University's David Cappy. Ka kite anō.